In Minoan Crete, anyone could tell your age, your rank, and even the ritual you had just completed simply by looking at your hair. It wasn't about fashion. It was a codified system visible in the frescoes. Archaeologists have decoded it so precisely that they can now reconstruct an individual's entire life cycle from a single 3,500 years old fragment of paint. Minoan childhood began with a shaved head. Boys and girls alike wore their scalps cropped, with only a few locks in the front and back. That bare skin was painted blue in the frescoes, the same convention pharaonic Egypt used to indicate a shaved scalp. In both cultures, a specific law grew along the right temple. For the Egyptians, it was the Horus lock, symbol of divine youth, and it has been suggested that its Minoan equivalent carried a similar significance. The parallel was not coincidental. The Minoans adopted that visual code deliberately, as part of a broader network of cultural exchange that also shaped the chromatic conventions of their frescoes. Just as in Egyptian painting, women were depicted with white skin, while men were rendered in a reddish-brown tone. The Theban tombs of the 18th dynasty confirm that the connection ran in both directions. In them, Aegean envoys, the Geftiu, are portrayed with their characteristic long cool hairstyles, recognized by Egyptian artists as makers of ethnic identity and status. At puberty, the path of boys and girls diverge. For girls, researchers have identified 6 life stages tied to physical development and the evolution of the hair. The most visible milestone was the replacement of the childhood lock with a ribbon knot or a diadem, the signal that the hair will begin to grow into long braids. The 6th and final stage, that of the matron, was distinguished by a more restrained style, snoods or nets with a few loose strands, marking authority and a role of knowledge transmission within the community. For males, the system was tripartite but equally articulated. The childhood locks were cut on entering youth to make way to the top knot, clearly visible on figures such as those represented in the chieftain cap. The fullness of youth came with wavy hair reaching the waist, a symbol of vitality and physical prowess. Advanced maturity brought the goatee and finally the full beard, unambiguous markers of authority, priesthood, or political leadership. None of these changes were personal aesthetic choices. They responded to institutional rites of passage. Ritual tonsure, the ceremonial shaving and cutting of hair, functioned as a mechanism of symbolic death and rebirth within the community. For young men, it has been proposed that these rites including initiation into elite groups. These organized cohorts, known as achelas, involve a period of seclusion in the wild dedicated to hunting, military training, and social apprenticeship under the guidance of a mentor, the philetor. The iconography of rings and seals shows young men in postures of submission or in intimate embraces with authority figures, representations that specialists have identified as initiation scenes toward the final stages of youth. At the end of that process, the young man, or parastatheis, received ritual gifts as established by law. These included military equipment, an ox for sacrifice, and a libation cup. Bull leaping, the taurocathapsia, appears to have formed part of this same cycle of maturation, as a test of courage required to reach a higher status. In every case, a new hairstyle marked the individual's return as a full member of society. Maintaining that entire system required infrastructure. At the Palace of Knossos, Arthur Evans identified one room as a possible barbershop, the room of the Great Pithor, in the west wing. Inside, an extraordinary quantity of obsidian blades was documented. Analysis of their wear patterns confirms they were used for cutting soft materials, human hair among them. This has been interpreted as evidence for the existence of specialized spaces within palatial structures, dedicated to maintaining the complex hairstyles of the elite. Obsidian was the precision tool of choice for shaving and cutting, eventually was replaced by bronze. Bronze razors evolved from leaf-shaped forms to single-edged models over the course of the palatial period, and appear alongside tweezers and combs in funerary context, stored with the same care as any object of value. Tweezers, on the other hand, typically used for hair removal, may have also served a medical function in warfare, for extracting arrowheads from the wounded, illustrating the fluid boundary between hygiene, aesthetics, and medicine in Minoan society. Finally, bronze mirrors with carved ivory handles appear in the iconography tied almost exclusively to female figures, in ritual or enthroned context. This association suggests that women's hair care was a ritualized act carrying a specific symbolic weight that did not apply to men in the same way. That said, the funerary record on the Greek mainland shows mirrors in tombs of both sexes, which complicates the picture. Regardless of an individual's age, hairstyle could also be shaped by religious or professional function. Ball-leaping participants and musicians sometimes appear with hairstyles associated with stages that do not correspond to the general physical appearance, indicating that certain ritual or profession activities impose their own visual codes. Musicians, for instance, are sometimes depicted wearing garments associated with the feminine, an ambiguity that some researchers have compared to figures of singers from the 3rd millennium at Mari, suggesting a tradition of fluid professional gender of possible Mesopotamian origin. Toward the end of the palatial period, already under Mycenaean influence, these age-based distinctions gave way to more rigid and uniform gender markers, reflecting a society increasingly oriented toward military hierarchy and palatial bureaucracy. Everything we know about this system, its stage, its rites, its meaning, has been reconstructed from frescoes, seals, and obsidian blades bearing traces of use. The Minoans left no text explaining any of this. They didn't need to. Their system was visible, written into the bodies of every person who walked through Knossos or Akrotiri. What was self-evident to them has taken decades of painstaking archaeological and iconographic work for us to even begin to decode.